Mayor Ray Miller is with us. City Council met last night among all the other activities that were going on. A busy night in Artesia last night, and City Council got to meet in all of that.
Yeah, it was a thing where, of course, we start at 5, and I think last night we were finished about 6 or just a little after. A couple of our items, we had a little more discussion than normal because a little bit of unusual type of items, but all in all, it was a pretty good session. We had quite a few of the candidates, both for city council and for mayor, in attendance at the meeting, and that's good because, you know, obviously some of those folks will be elected, and as a result gives them an opportunity to kind of get the feel for the council meetings. Doesn't give them the feel for all of the work at the committee level, but certainly gives them a feel for the council meetings as we're handling them at this point. So, you know, it was good. It's a thing where obviously I think the one thing that, you know, I'd like to mention at the front and also try to remember to mention at the end of our discussion today is the fact of encouraging folks to get out and vote. It's a thing where, you know, in my district, with the redistricting, I now live in Raul and the Mariscal district. So Raul Rodriguez is running for council and he's unopposed. So I didn't have to worry about who I was voting for council because it was easy. And I can assure everybody that he's been reelected because I've already voted.
Oh, so you did the early voting?
I did the early voting,
okay.
And the early voting is available at City Hall every day. And I strongly recommend to folks, once they've decided who they're voting for council and for mayor, to go ahead and vote, because why wait? And then if something comes up on the first where you're not available, you know, you get busy and or you forget and you've missed it, you know. And it's a thing where with 5 folks running in the race for mayor, there should be enough competition, and all in looking at the number of signs that are already up in the city around, there's a lot of folks looking for votes, and I've encouraged folks that once they've decided to go ahead and go to the city. You know, I walked in, it was a very quick and short process. I think I was number 22 or 23.
Oh, wow, already.
So, you know, well, you say already, but I think they've been open for a week at this point. So.
Well, okay, all right. You know, 3 a day, all right,
yeah.
all right.
But at least...
Were you the morning, midday, or afternoon voter? You know?
Yeah, well, that's it. But you walk in, and if you just turn to your left as you walk in, they're right there, and they're just waiting for you to show up. So, yeah.
Well, and I think the chamber had the candidate forum a few weeks ago at the Ocotillo, and I saw where they are also hosting one at a time each one of the 5 mayoral candidates of the chamber, if folks want to do a one-on-one conversation with these folks.
And I think a lot of folks have already decided who they basically are looking at supporting, and if they have, I suggest they go ahead and vote and get it done before something comes up where they don't get it, because with the fact that it's just the city election, it's not with the school board, it's not with other races, you know, I'm very concerned that the turnout will be low. And then if you don't like who gets elected, you have no one to blame for you except for yourself if you didn't get out and then vote and support, you know, whichever candidate you were actually trying to get elected. So
yeah.
But anyway, we wound up, didn't have anything unusual in the front part of our agenda last night. Consent agenda. The only item that came up for just a comment was the fact of the retirement of John Beasley as one of our police commanders. Certainly appreciate, his service, or one of the counselors, identified appreciation of his service and years with the Artesia PD, and hate to see him retire. But, we also understand it's a thing where when you're eligible for retirement, taking it is not a bad deal. I think our state is trying to figure out a way to actually modify the double dipping law, and they truly should, because it is absolutely a shame that when we have people who see this as their life profession, are well trained, are certified, that we can't figure out a way to not only let them enjoy their retirement, but at the same time let them continue to provide the service, because many of them that retire are young enough and love the job to where they would be a real asset. But anyway, I'm not sure that the bill that is currently in front of the legislature, the way it's drafted, will actually solve the problem. But it's a thing where I certainly would encourage the legislature to get a modification, because we have instances here in our community where I know one of our former people went to eastern New Mexico to teach. Well, they were advised that that was considered double dipping. Even though they weren't in law enforcement, they couldn't, work for the state as well as draw retirement from the state. And I mean, and that's crazy. So they went across the state line and moved to Texas and taught school in Texas. Well, why do we export some of our fine talent that has the expertise? But anyway, it's...
Well, and I think some of it, too, dates back when there were plenty of people and not enough positions. And so let's retire folks out and not encourage them to come back so we can have lots of jobs for all these young people here, but we don't have that situation today.
Well, and I think where their primary problem came up early on was the public employee retirement. And by the double dipping, it was increasing the benefits and not adding to the fund.
Right.
And it winds up being a thing where there are a lot of ways that they can figure out how to solve that and allow folks to actually still be productive if they want to receive their retirement benefit, and we still keep the parafund whole so that it's not being hurt by allowing folks to continue to serve after they're eligible for full retirement. But anyway, that's one of the challenges that the legislature has, and they've got so many interesting bills up there. And when I say interesting, they're things that just are crazy. I mean, they've got, I think House Bill 6 is being heard today, which is, just devastating to the oil and gas industry. But it's also a thing where if you read the bill, we were talking about it at breakfast this morning. I believe everybody in the northern part of the state that uses firewood to heat their house with a stove indoors, because I mean, if you go through a lot of the smaller communities in northern New Mexico in the wintertime, it's just a haze on a calm morning because of all of the firewood that's being burned for heat. You have to reduce your carbon or CO2 emissions by 90%. Even at your residence. And I'm thinking, well, if those people knew that they were not going to be allowed to burn their firewood, we would have an uproar to where Santa Fe wouldn't be considering that bill. But, unfortunately, a lot of that legislation, no one thinks about all of the consequences to all of the citizenry. They're just, we're trying to be greener than the rest of the world. So, unfortunately, well, I don't want to get on a soapbox.
Frustrating.
Let's talk about city council. That's right. A nonpartisan deal.
Well, let me ask you this, because you're talking about the retirement announcement of the police officer. One of the things I found kind of interesting is in the mayor's race in Roswell, law enforcement attracting officers has been an issue in that campaign there. And they keep saying how they've got to raise their pay because Artesia's paying too much to start, and Hobbs is paying too much to start, and Carlsbad's paying too much to start. You're mayor. You've been observing how Artesia compares. What would be a more realistic observation of where everybody is as far as that's concerned in southeast New Mexico?
It truly has been over the years, if you look historically, as different departments raise their salaries, then other departments raise their salaries to try to remain relatively competitive. And I mean, the sheriff's department here in Eddy County has convinced the commission to raise their salaries. I've asked the commission to, try not to get out of line with things, because if they raise theirs, we raise ours, then Lee County raises theirs, Hobbs raises theirs, then we come back, raise ours. It becomes just a stair step. And it's not a thing where, I don't want to, underpay our police or fire, but I don't want to underpay any of our employees, and it becomes a deal. And, I think here a few years ago, the Eddy County Sheriff offered $5,000 sign-on bonuses. Well, if you can receive the same or slightly higher pay and get a $5,000 sign-on bonus, why wouldn't you consider moving?
You at least think about it, yeah.
Yeah. Now, we had a discussion about should we offer sign-on bonuses. Well, basically, we think those were illegal in the pay structure of state government, that we couldn't do those. So as a result, we didn't follow that practice. But, it was a very attractive incentive. I was told the other day that they don't do that anymore. But, but it's one of those things where, I know several of our officers left and went to work for the sheriff's department. But unfortunately, it's a thing where that'll be an opportunity for the new mayors, because I've heard a lot of them talking about the fact that we need to raise police and fire, and that's all fine. I do think that they will probably look at doing some of that. I think at the same time, they'll probably look at raising all of our salaries, and particularly in this time of inflation. But one of the challenges that they have is, yes, our gross receipts this year have been very good from what they were last year and the year before. But it's also a thing where, there are good times in our community, and then there are the downturns. We tend to not be a relatively flat, just slow growth in gross receipts on a continual basis. We tend to have the booms and the busts. And, if you get to where you spend everything in the boom, then when you bust, you basically are drawing your reserves, and then you basically are trying to tighten belts and really cause problems inside your workforce with morale issues and stuff. It hasn't been that many years ago, thankfully before my term, that the council actually cut salaries rather than lay people off, because their reserves had drawn down and they were projecting either further drawdown in their reserves, and felt that they had to do something, and they made the decision to cut salaries instead of lay folks off. And I believe every counselor who served at that time, who still serves on the city council, would tell you they would never vote for that again.
I've heard that. Plus, you can look at in the last year and a half, the facility that the refinery has been expanding and building has got to be one of the things that's impacting that. And then look at the barrel price of oil right now, and that's got to have an impact too.
The turnaround that Navajo did and the biodiesel facility that they're building have brought an unusual amount of people into our community for the last 4 or 5 months. Obviously the turnaround was probably a 6-week type of time frame, but there were folks here with the biodiesel before, through, and are still here, and that's just added to our economic activity, whether it be restaurant utilization and stuff. Our gross receipts numbers have been excellent for the last couple of months, and that's great. because, it's allowed the council. In fact, a couple of meetings ago, we actually spent some major capital expenditures the expenditures that they approved totaled over a couple $1 million in expenses, and most of them were one-time things, but some of them were actually beginning to authorize the rehiring of positions to try to improve departments like streets and parks out there.
So it's good when it's there.
Yeah, it's good when it's there, and if you tend to, in the ups only do one-time type of items instead of adding to your recurring expense, because a lot of projects, they're great projects, but they add ongoing recurring expense that you've got to figure out how to pay for years to come. So.
Yeah, well, that's good. But that was from the consent agenda.
Yeah, it's a thing where we had, very few committee reports. I know, or there wasn't anything exciting actually discussed out of those. In personnel, we actually, and one of the items that we spent quite a bit of time on last night was talking about our code enforcement new position that we're actually looking at doing. Unfortunately, we've had Jesse as code enforcement, and Jesse's been great, but he advised us several months ago now, in fact, many months ago now, that he would be retiring this spring. And as a result, we had started advertising, I think back in September or October, for his position. We'd had some candidates, but didn't find what we saw as a great replacement for Jesse. And so there was discussion also about the fact of maybe we should consider having, either an additional part-time or additional full-time to where we have two code enforcement, because, over the holidays, Jesse took some of the vacation that he had accrued, and certainly was entitled to, but with him out for a week, then, there isn't, so to speak, a code enforcement person. And there were a couple of things that came up during that time. And where if you had, a second person, even if it was a part-timer, they would be available to help with those areas during the time that the other person was off. So it's not bad to have a backup. But anyway, we thought what council had done at the meeting, but then after that meeting, some discussion, it appeared that some of the councilors didn't think that what was voted on was actually what they thought they were voting on. And it's a thing where I don't believe, and the council has worked extremely well, and I appreciate everything that they've done. And as a result, I'm not one to say, well, let's go back and listen to the tape, because we obviously tape every meeting, and whatever the tape says is what we're going to do. So
I mean, you could, but that's not what you want to do, right?
And so last night we brought it up again and had quite a bit of discussion, and there was a motion made, and then after some more discussion, and it was seconded, then the person who made the motion withdrew the motion.
Oh, no.
And we withdrew it and voted on that, and then we made a new motion, and basically they authorized, and we've budgeted for a second code enforcement person, but they've actually asked that it be advertised as a part-time position. And part of it becomes is we have in fact, at this meeting, we hired a new full-time person for code enforcement, so hopefully he can get some training from Jesse before he leaves. And if we can hire a part-time person, then that'll give them more than what they've had in the way of just one full-time person in the department. And then if over time we see that, there truly is a need for two full-time people, they've already authorized it in the budget where, the planning committee can come back with a recommendation to council. So, but it's also a thing where sometimes a part-time position opens up to a different pool of possible applicants than what you have when you're only looking for a full-time person, because there are folks who, because of wanting to get their kids off from school, be able to pick their kids up from school, don't want to work a full 8 to 5 schedule. But if they could work 4 hours each day while their kids are at school, they might be great employees. I know we identified a new employee out at the airport for a part-time position, and looks to be a great employee. And it was a thing where I think the person is retired, didn't want to work full-time, but was looking for an opportunity to add some supplemental income to their retirement, and just a super employee for Lance out at the airport to have added to his team. So, a lot of times in the city, if you can figure out creative ways to make it work better for employees, then it may give you an opportunity to fill a job with a very good employee, whereas they wouldn't have considered it if it was full-time versus part-time.
So after all of that process, the council approved the new hire.
Right.
And approved budgeting for a full-time position, but only going out and advertising for a
part-time, and see if we actually get a part-time. And if we get a part-time person, then let them get into the mix with the full-time person and see if the 1.5 gives us plenty. Because, Jesse's done a very good job in code enforcement, but there are times when there's a lot on his plate. Some summers we have really good rains, and the weeds grow like rabbits.
But all the council agreed, and
all the council agreed, and everybody was happy.
And you didn't have to play the tape.
No, I think everybody was happy except maybe our community development director. But anyway, it's a thing where as long as the council all feels that they know what they voted on, then I didn't have a problem either way, because it's a thing where there was a thought process here a few weeks ago that it looked like we might have 2 good applicants for code enforcement, but that didn't work out, and so as a result, I don't have a problem. However they decided last night was fine with me, and it's a thing where because it can always be modified in the future, and they've provided the latitude to make the modification to where they don't have to worry about, we don't have it in the budget to make this change if they see the need in the future.
They've taken care of that situation. So we need to take a break for some other news headlines, if that's okay.
Sure.
We're going to